Marketers know that digital marketing represents the future of their business. That's why, according to a recent CMO survey, they're happy to allocate 57% of their budgets to digital marketing activities and are planning to increase spending by another 16%. However, the survey also found that this contribution has weakened over the past year. More than 30% of marketers who participated said that they're experiencing average to no returns on their investments, which could create funding difficulties in the future if they're not able to overcome this gap. Now, that's a serious problem, and our guest today has solutions, and we'll dive into that in a bit. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success Podcast, brought to you by Sproutworth.com. I'm Vinay Koshi, and our guest today is Dr. Anna Harrison. Anna, you're a top-ranked digital technology advisor, CEO and founder of RAMMP. Now, RAMMP, I believe, is a platform that automates the patent process that you've developed to help brands significantly improve conversion rates and brand loyalty. You are also the author of the book, Digital Brand Romance, How to Create Lasting Relationships in a Digital World. Perhaps more importantly, you've worked with startups and Fortune 500 companies in Australia, Europe, and the United States, and led several of these product teams to numerous successes, including raising venture capital for companies like Tiny, Tririga, I hope that's how you say it, Travelers Box, AdSpace, and many others. I'm curious, Anna, given your journey to date and work in the tech space in particular, was there a pivotal moment that led you to create and solve the problem that RAMMP does? And is that problem the same as it was back then?
Yes. So thanks, Vinay. Excellent question to give us context and get started on. But before I answer it, I'm actually going to speak to that intro which you gave, because those stats are fascinating and they're really so aligned with the reason why RAMMP exists. It's not so much to improve conversion rates, because that is a fantastic financial outcome for brands, but it's really to help the CMOs who show up for work every day, who have to ask for more budgets, who can't justify the spend, and they have the stress. They're doing an amazing job. It's not even their fault, but the system is what it is. It's incredibly inefficient. 3% conversion rates mean 97% waste. And so that's the space that we really live into. But to answer your question directly, was there a pivotal moment that led to RAMMP? I always love that the Stanford commencement address that Steve Jobs gave, very famous. And in there, he talks about the dots line up in retrospect. So the moment you're doing something, you're like, hey, I'm doing this because it's interesting, because I'm here, because the opportunity is in front of me. And then when you look with the perspective of time, sometimes you go, wow, that did lead to that and did lead to that. And here we are. So I think the pivotal moment for RAMMP was around 10 years ago. I was reading an article in the New Yorker called "To Fall in Love with Anyone, Do This," right? And I'm reading this and I'm as cynical as anything. And basically it was around research from Columbia University that suggested that there is a formula for love. Now, my background is and probably most people educated in Western societies are very analytical and fact-based, and just the sheer notion that there would be a formula for creating relationships and a formula for love was like, it really made my head explode. And I thought, what? No, that can't be right. So anyway, I looked into this and I went and I actually researched and looked at the papers from Aaron and his team at Columbia University. And it did indeed look very much like they had found or discovered a formula for how people form relationships. And it was all in a dating context. And lots of people read that New Yorker article, but I'm potentially one of the few who thought, hey, if you can apply this to love, can we apply this to business? And so in a way, if I look back on that moment, it really started a trajectory where for the next decade, I started applying those principles in business and to running product teams and to aligning product teams and marketing teams and engineering teams around a framework that has evolved and become what RAMMP is today. So there was a moment, and that was it. 36 love questions.
That's quite the story. I'm also curious, and we'll come back to that story and how it's evolved since then, but I'm also curious, given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
Oh, raising children that seem to be reasonably okay adults, having functional relationships myself, and showing up for work, excited to be at work every day, and somehow carving out a little space on this planet where, you know, my interest, my capability, and what I am actually doing during the day, it all aligns. So I think that's my biggest win. Yeah.
And that's something that people don't talk about very often. So I'm also curious, what would you say that area of strength is something that businesses or business people don't know, but should?
For myself, like, what is my personal area of strength, or in general, what is an area of strength that people don't acknowledge?
You just talked about your personal area of strength of being able to carve out a bit of personal time and raise children, etc. Given that, what would you say that most people in business today don't know, but should?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. And I think it just differs for so many people. Like, the thing I don't know everything about. So maybe the answer to the question is really the magic lies in finding the people whose area of strength is completely different to your own and not being threatened by that. Because the complexity in the world is huge, right? 100 years ago, problems were easy. And so as a person, I could solve them. Whereas now problems are really complicated. And as a person, it's unlikely that I'm going to know everything that I need to solve problems with that degree of complexity. So it's necessary that to do anything substantial or impactful, we have to collaborate. And the best collaborations are where you understand where your area of capability ends and someone else's begins, and you give them the freedom to shine and do what they're amazing at. So I don't know if there's any one answer, but I think the magic lies in putting together people whose capability bubbles are complementary.
And that's an interesting perspective. Earlier, you were talking about the journey that you took towards building RAMMP, and this idea of formula for love could be applied to the digital marketing landscape. And here we're now talking about focusing in on things that matter the most to you, for example, family. In the digital marketing space, would you say that perhaps we get a little too broad in our outreach and expect better conversion rates as a result, and therefore perhaps should be really very well defined in who we talk to and reach out to as a good way to ensure that our conversion rates, are the best it could be, and then refine the messaging and the techniques that we use to better our relationships?
Yeah, I think your question really highlights something which is true of the space. And so again, if I step into the shoes of a CMO, for example, for people listening, if you're in charge of a marketing team or you're working on your business's marketing, bringing that to life, and you're working with external agencies, whichever the case is, if you've been in business for more than 5 years and you're in the field of marketing, the landscape has changed hugely. 20 years ago, marketing was a completely different beast than it is today. So it's quite hard to really know exactly what to do when the landscape is shifting beneath your feet. So I think that's one kind of angle. I think the other really important thing to acknowledge is that in general, marketing means different things to different people, just like the word design. So when I was working with companies out of New Zealand, and I did about hundreds of these during COVID, hundreds of workshops with really different companies, all high growth exporters, they would all come to me for marketing, and we would unpack that. And some people actually needed a new website. Some people needed to change the onboarding inside their app. Some people needed performance marketing. And so what became clear is that this entire field of digital or digital design, whatever we want to call it, it's not standardized. It's really hard to measure, and people use words imprecisely, right? And so your question asked, do we focus on messaging? Do we focus on spending more money on ads? That's exactly the issue. Like, no one actually understands what is the one thing that is most worth doing next. And this is the problem that we created RAMMP to solve. So to go back to your opening stats, people are spending 50% more on marketing, and that's increasing by 16%, and they're getting lower ROI. And there's a reason. For this. The reason for this is that we're applying budget to solve a marketing problem, and it could be that's actually the wrong problem to solve. Like, it might not be that your brand has a marketing problem. Maybe you don't need more site visitors coming in. Maybe the issue is that your value proposition doesn't align. Maybe the issue is that your pricing model doesn't align with where people have a willingness to pay and perceive value. Maybe the issue is that your brand story isn't articulated in the right way, right? Now, each of these things, I've just thrown out a handful of things, and each one of those things takes a different skill set to solve for, right? So performance marketing, that's a different kind of agency than working with someone to solve for your pricing model. It's a very different skill set, and you would engage a different agency if you wanted to tell your brand narrative in a more engaging way through your website, for example. And so once again, we come back to that overworked CMO who's doing their very best. The landscape has shifted under their feet in the last 10, 15 years. And all of a sudden, they're like on the hook to justify budget, where the reality is that they're solving the wrong problem.
With RAMMP, are you looking at where best to make the biggest gains quickly? Or because you just described a multitude of problems, where exactly does RAMMP fit and what problems does it solve?
Yeah, in effect, so RAMMP is based on the premise that relationship is everything. If you can create an amazing relationship with your target audience, your cost of customer acquisition goes down, your revenue goes up, your conversion rates improve. And so if you look at that word relationship, going back to the formula for love, right? This is where it connects together. But if you look at the word relationship, how does that play out in digital? And so the wonderful thing about having a relationship with your target audience evolve in digital is that we can measure things, because every interaction in digital leaves behind little markers. So we can collect that data. And by collecting that data and analyzing it, we can actually discover where in that relationship you're strong and where you're weak. And from that, we can identify what's the one thing that's most worth doing next. What's the thing you should apportion your marketing budget to next month? And it might not be more Google AdWords. It might be working with a really amazing branding agency. It might be fixing the onboarding in your app. It might be getting a pricing specialist to work on your pricing model. So RAMMP ingests analytics, so it's all objective, fact-based. It's very easy. It ingests your Google Analytics and a couple of extra markers, and then it gives you a read on where your relationship along 6 milestones, and this is the bit we have patented, where your relationship is tracking well. And if it is, leave it alone, don't touch that. And where it's not tracking well, and then it gives you a script for who to talk to and what kind of levers you have to affect and improve performance at that particular marker.
If we can get a little more granular, because I'm sure there's a listener going, that sounds terrific, but how do analytics tell me whether I have a branding problem or not?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Effectively, what we look at is the traces left behind. So we look at the target audience in aggregate. We don't do attribution. So it's the net effect of all the interactions. And let's use a website for ease of the conversation, right? Because everyone can relate to that. You've got markers left in your Google Analytics. We take those markers, which admittedly, you're probably collecting much more complicated data, and that's great. And that data comes in handy, but hold on to it for a minute. So we look at the broad Google Analytics and also a few financial markers. So what is your aspirational revenue? Because that tells us where the business is going. And so we can project ahead, right? And we look at basic average basket size, how many buyers you had last month. So that goes in. And then the algorithms take that and splice it together with AI that has to do with behavioral economics. So what can we learn from interactions that actually tell us something about the behavior and intent of people? And from that, we partition it into 6 milestones. And the milestones reflect how the evolution of a relationship. I'll give you a couple of examples. I won't go through all the steps in case the listeners fall asleep. So 0 seconds is the inception point of the relationship. That's the very first marker that we measure. And that's the arrival of your site visitor on your website. So at that point, all your marketing budget has been consumed, because whatever you did to get the site visitor to your website, your site visitor arrived. It's the 0 second marker, right? So straight away, you can tell that first marker is measuring the effectiveness of all of your marketing efforts, right? And the next marker, and again, think about how do we form relationships as human beings? The next marker is first impression. If you and I were to meet in person, you'd have a very quick assessment of Yes, this is a conversation. I'm going to talk to Anna. She seems reasonably normal and no red flags. Whereas sometimes you come across someone where you're like, I'm going to cross the road and take a wide berth. I don't know what's going on, but I don't want to be anywhere near. We do these things when it's human relationships. But I think what most people don't ever think about is that we do these things when it's a relationship with a brand in digital as well. So that brand has to pass the first impression. And the first impression is made up of factors. So first impression on a website is your value proposition, it's your visuals, it's your vibe, it's your establishment of credibility very quickly, right? And so from that, we go, those are the ingredients that make a first impression. If your numbers for that are really low, you need to work with a branding agency and you need to work on the value proposition and that part of your brand and of all the digital stuff that you have out there. You don't need to send more people to your website. You need to fix your first impression and so on. And for each of the markers, we've broken it down into what are the input metrics that we measure, and then what are the levers that you have, which you can control so that you can improve performance at that milestone.
Okay, so you're looking at data using what I would perhaps call psychology, and if that's an appropriate term, to understand user behavior once they're on your site, and then drawing conclusions based off of data and of course the science behind it. That's very interesting. In the B2B space, more often than not, it's a bit of a convoluted process. Just because a person comes onto your website does not mean that they are necessarily entering into a relationship. So in that context, does a model like the one that you're describing, based around attraction, if I could put it that way, really work? Or does it need to be tweaked a little bit to look a bit differently for the B2B context?
Yeah, great question. And I'll start at the end. So far, we've had hundreds of brands, and the majority of them have been professional services, B2B, and SaaS companies and fintechs. We do have some e-commerce kind of lipstick in the shopping cart type of brands, but the majority of them are B2B and so on. So the model definitely applies, and the types of results we've had consistently with those professional services, SaaS companies, and B2B sphere is that we've been able to improve conversion rates between 10 and 40% without really much effort. Okay, the model works. The attraction part is only the first bit. So the first impression, right? You got to have the opportunity. The first impression is the first bit. So those are 2 of the 6 steps. We measure 4 other things. And the important thing is that with each of those 6 milestones, 2 things. One is that you have to go through each of the stages to develop a good relationship, because each of them is effectively a measure of trust, right? So example, if you go on a first date and there's attraction and you've created the opportunity, you both show up, there's an attraction there. If you ask that person to marry you and have 7 children on that first date, the answer is probably not going to be favorable. A hot tip to anyone listening, right? But if you hold your horses and buy a few dinners and maybe have a weekend away and ask exactly the same question further downstream, maybe 6 months down the line, your answer could be very favorable. Now, you haven't changed, the other person hasn't changed. It's simply that you have given the relationship the opportunity to develop trust. And so same thing in B2B and those kinds of transactions. Sure, if I'm a legal firm, no one is coming to my website to purchase legal services and put them into a shopping cart. But you bet they're doing due diligence to figure out whether I'm a trustworthy and credible brand. And sure, I can have a website which is a brochure, but I probably could make that asset work for me better by putting in place just the right kind of call to actions where I can create qualifying leads being generated to my sales team from the website, right? So each of these markers needs to be gone through to develop a stronger relationship. And if you put the right markers in place, you can actually make that website generate leads and pass those leads off to your sales team. So you are right. You are right in saying, do we need to tweak the model a little bit? And the answer is yes. There's a couple of markers where if you're a professional services company, as opposed to a SaaS company, as opposed to e-commerce, put in slightly different, they map to slightly different metrics in your business. So there is a little bit of tweaking, but the model itself applies because ultimately it's human beings forming a relationship. And that's the part that's predictable that we've created algorithms around.
And with these markers that you talk about, do we need to put in, or do you educate people to put in the appropriate markers that would better inform the picture that they're creating around the customer journey?
Yeah, so the markers are, the 6 markers I'm referring to is the adore process. So adore as in I adore you, I love you, easy
Right.
to remember.
Yeah.
So that's the patented process that's described in the book. And for anyone, you're welcome to read the book and you'll understand everything about the algorithms inside RAMP from that. Those are the milestones or the markers. The inputs that go into RAMP, because we're reading the relationship across a website, are things from Google Analytics. So it's not a one-to-one. It's not like I put in number of site visitors and that gives me a read on marker number 1. They get spliced together using some magic. That's not really magic, but using an algorithm, and we get an outcome. But the inputs are literally number of site visitors, bounce rate, pages visited, really reasonably fundamental stuff. If you're a marketer, you're collecting much more sophisticated data. And so the whole point of RAMP isn't that we displace your other technologies or your other more detailed analytics. It's that we give you a very easy way to understand where to apportion your budget. And then let's say you have a failure point at onboarding. Absolutely look at Hotjar or do some usability testing or use one of your other tools, but do that with purpose and with the ability to report back to your boss or to the board that, hang on, it's not that we're not getting an ROI on our marketing spend, it's that we're fixing a different problem. And so it was 6 months.
Could you take us through the adore process that you talked about? I'm sure you've highlighted a couple of the steps, but could you talk us through the
Sure.
6
I'll give you a quick
steps?
spin. Absolutely.
Sure.
0 seconds is the moment someone lands on your website.
Right.
Covered that one off. First impression, that's 10 seconds. In 10 seconds, I get a first impression. If I don't get that right, your site visitor goes to your competitor. It's pretty simple, right? The next marker is 3 minutes. And again, these are not absolute timestamps. They're like concepts, but roughly in 3 minutes per session, you're gonna figure out whether someone is engaged with your brand and engaging with your brand story or not. And people could come back 7 times. If it's a complex SaaS deal, I'm not going to just do 1 visit to your website and we're done and I've bought, right? I'm going to come back times and I'm going to look at specifications on my 10th visit, but your high level brand story on my first. So that's that one. And yeah, next marker is sign up. So sign up is an important one because we've gone on our first date, we've gone on a few follow-up dates, and we've told each other our life story. And then sign up in the model refers to an exchange of value. So it's like we are moving in together now. We've done the dinners, we've done the picnics, we've done the weekends away, and now we're actually making a commitment. And if you think through that lens, you go, when I go to a website and I have to input my email address, or I have to input my email address and phone number to download a specific report, it's a definite sign that I'm interested, because otherwise I'm not going to do it. So the important thing there is that there's a moment where there is an exchange of value, which signals to you as a brand that the site visitors are making a commitment, they're interested. Then the next marker is, again, if you think in human terms, you've moved in together, there better be some quick wins after that. Otherwise, you're going to be like, geez, why did we do this? So in business terms, that next marker is called first 48 hours. And it's the first 48 hours after someone makes a commitment to your brand. So easiest example is SaaS product. I've signed up for a free trial. And you think, oh, it's easy. You've signed up for a free trial. Surely we will change your life and you will have our product. And you think, well, hang on, how many apps have you downloaded that you never ever use? There's your answer. So you've got to deliver a quick win after someone signs up. And that's typically the efficacy of your onboarding process, or whether someone can figure out how to use your app so they feel smart and they get a quick win, right, etc. If it's a professional services company, then that marker 48 hours refers to the effectiveness of handing off from the website, from the qualified lead to your sales team or your business development team, and whether you still engage people at that next moment. And then the last marker that we measure is upgrade. And that's a tricky one. It's the effectiveness of your pricing model and your business. So those are the six sort of milestones. And for each of those, RAMP gives you a score. And so month on month, you can track performance, which really makes reporting to your boss super easy.
What about situations perhaps with high ticket items where there are conversations that need to be had in person or via Zoom, etc., and it goes not necessarily offline, but certainly off of your website onto other platforms or in person, etc. How do we track that component in order to build up the whole journey?
Yeah. So this is where that little bit of tweaking for the model, the sign-up score and the first 48-hour score, this is where that customization happens. So if I've got a product where, imagine you've got a sales pipeline or a marketing pipeline and it has certain stages, you've got to look at where in that stage do I consider that my customer has had a win and they're very likely to upgrade. And could be tracking this in Salesforce, or you could be tracking this in HubSpot or in a spreadsheet or in something else altogether. And so those numbers need to simply be put in. So with some clients, we set up different views in HubSpot and they get the numbers from there for sign up and for first 48 hours. With others, they run different internal reports and we have a look at what in your specific funnel, whether it's your sales funnel or your process and so on, maps to that moment where you know that you've delivered a win for your customer and they're pretty likely to continue with you. It could be the end of a proof of concept, for example. So there's a little bit of variability in what you put into that number.
Certainly. Okay. Really, if I could put this in a slightly different way, with the Adore process, you're trying to build a narrative that engages your potential customers right from the moment that they become aware of you through to post sign up, and if a year or 5 years down the track where they still see value and then really appreciate the value that you bring to them. How should we be thinking about this ongoing narrative? Because there's a lot of conversation around brand storytelling, etc. Donald Miller certainly made that quite popular. But in terms of keeping people engaged and continuing that narrative that puts them at the center of the story, how should we be thinking of that?
Yeah, look, exactly like that, right? So if I look at the psychology, if I'm a site visitor or I'm a human being, I'm really busy. I make 35,000 decisions a day, right? Yep. You as the brand think that the only thing in my life is to evaluate your brand. But the reality is that I'm sitting in the car waiting for my kids to finish soccer. I'm thinking about the dinner I haven't got ingredients for, the things I'm running late for, the meeting that I have tomorrow morning, and 1,000 other things, right? To engage me and come to the table and tell me how you make my life better, it's pivotal. It's just critical. And the more noisy the whole marketing and storytelling and that whole space gets, now with chatbot and AI generated content and etc., the amount of noise in the space is going to go exponential. And so the ability to put yourself into your customer's shoes and tell your story from the perspective of how do you actually make my life better is critical, right? The issue really is, how do you know when you're making progress in that? It's one thing to say that human-centered or customer-centered narrative is favorable. Absolutely it is. There's so many markers that point towards that. The next thing is, I've hired 10 agencies and they've all done pieces of work and they've all consumed my budget, but how do I even know whether I'm tracking in the right direction or not in the right direction? The impact on conversion rates may not be immediate, especially when you look at B2B sales. It could take a year or 18 months to close a deal, whereas marketing cycles are monthly. Every month, your CMO is on the hook to report to the boss, where did the budget go? So there's that disconnect. And I think where we provide value is the ability to put some objective metrics on an area which is otherwise fuzzy. And we take away the need for opinion, and we really help people to approach the space both in a standardized way and there is no silver bullet. We've got to try things, and it's let's try things out. Let's measure whether that change to the story had an effect and resonated with our target audience or not, and just take away some of the guesswork,
Just to ensure that I understand this correctly. So this, the platform really allows businesses to not just identify areas for potential growth and improvement, but also allows for data to be garnered around experiments or hypotheses that they come up with and wish to implement or try out in order to iterate and find which ones work better or convert better. Would that be correct?
Yes, with an asterisk. So
okay.
the asterisk being that we don't track the experiments unless you set them up as different landing pages and different URLs. So you can track the effect of experiments, but you almost have to do that a little bit offline. For example, if you get a low score on that 3-minute marker and you go, okay, I understand this is the project that we're going to do next month to lift that score. You do the project, you ship the changes to your website, and then you go and measure the effect of that a month later. The uplift in that score is because of that experiment that you did, but that experiment isn't directly tracked inside the platform yet.
And I guess the question that a lot of folk, especially agencies, will have is that, is it absolutely essential to have Google Analytics or a client share the Google Analytics access with you to benefit from the platform? Because I'm sure a lot of folk are a little bit cagey about giving out access. Is there another workaround around that?
There's 2 ways. So you can connect your Google Analytics with a login and password, but you also have the option to type the numbers in. All right. So because it is metrics based, if you don't have access to the actual numbers, there's very little you can do. That said, most brands, you can look up third-party tools like SEMrush and get the Google Analytics.
Okay,
they're not always 100% accurate, but if it's a trusted agency client model, most of your clients should be happy to share their Google Analytics, especially in service of let's track the performance of the work that we're doing and let's figure out what the next piece of work should be. Right. What we're finding interesting and related to this idea is, again, if you look at third-party services that provide you with access to, if I look at carsales.com, I can look up what their Google Analytics are on third-party tools. And what that opens the door to is to actually use the platform for prospecting. So we actually have some agencies who have gone, hang on, we can use this to win client deals by presenting them with a program of works that's evidence-based and metrics-based. We differentiate ourselves and it builds credibility and trust because you're having a conversation with the client, not around the skills that you have in your agency, but around the work that needs to be done to improve relationships with your audience and therefore conversion rates.
Interesting, very interesting. With this area of the adore process and conversion rates, I'm assuming that it also helps democratize the ability to understand data and analytics, because that's a challenge for most marketing teams, I would imagine. And is there anything else that they should understand or be aware of in the data and analytics space, even if they had RAMMP in their suite of tools that they could use?
Yeah, so I've worked in the space for a long time, and let's say Google Analytics is probably the most used marketing technology. I mean, I don't know, that I'm bad with zeros, but 9 billion, 9 whatever. There's a lot of users of Google Analytics, right? I've worked in the space for a long time, as have all of your listeners. I still haven't met someone who can jump into Google Analytics and go, oh, I'm looking at the Google Analytics dashboard. Of course, this is what I should do next to shift the needle, get a better ROI and improve conversion rates, right? Google Analytics is the most prevalent and widely occurring tool that everyone has access to. If you depart from there and you start looking at Klaviyo and Kitewheel and things which cost 150 grand a year plus, the hidden cost there is that you need to start hiring data scientists to drive those tools. You know? And so, yes, there are much more complicated analytics to be collected, right? Yes, you can hire and amass a team of data scientists to interpret those analytics. However, most, if you look at 80% of businesses out there, and they're businesses that are high growth and great profitability and expanding globally and so on, they don't have a team of 10 data scientists. And they don't have a marketing budget of 10 million a year to hire WP to work on their issues and assign a team of data scientists. So it's a very long way of saying, absolutely, we democratize access to that. We take away the need for having a team of really experienced and hard to find people, plus really expensive data analytics tools, and provide you with insights that are really no integrations, very simple to get up. It takes 30 seconds to run a RAMP report.
Mm.
Now, RAMP is a diagnostic. It doesn't solve the problem for you. It guides you, it provides you the high-level strategy and says, talk to this kind of agency and ask them to do this kind of piece of work for you. But that is strategic marketing insights, which previously were not available to most companies with smaller marketing teams.
Yeah, brilliant. Is there, or are there aspects to mapping the digital customer journey that perhaps doesn't get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
I think it depends. The answer is it depends who you talk to, right? If we're talking to CX and UX specialists, they've mapped the hell out of the customer journey, right? If we talk to marketing, they've mapped the hell out of campaigns to begin the customer journey, right?
Yep.
And so I think that there is an excellent Gartner report that looks at all of the marketing technologies out there and segments them and so on. And there's a table at the end of that report which shows that all the marketing technologies out there live in a silo within a business. What I mean by that is that the technology is either purchased by the marketing department and used by them, or by the design team and used by them, or by development and used by them, right? There wasn't a single marketing technology in market right now which spans across the entirety of marketing, design, and development. And the reason that's significant is that the customer journey doesn't exist in one silo in a business, right? It's marketing, it's design, it's development, and I would even add customer service in there. They're an integral part of the customer journey. The answer to that is there doesn't exist tooling right now which actually aligns and provides a common framework across all of those different areas in the business. And is there a glaring hole in the customer journey right now? It depends who you talk to. For marketing folks that are traditional marketing folks, the glaring hole often is something downstream. Like maybe your brand story is not being told in an effective way. Maybe you're losing people after they sign up. If you're losing people there, think about it. You've spent the money to get them to your website. Your branding's amazing. You've passed the first date. You've had a few dinners and conversations. Everything's going well. And then you drop them. That's an expensive leak in your funnel. That's one that you want to plug up ASAP.
That's a lot of sense. The other question I had is around AI. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation around it with ChatGPT, etc. I would imagine that in trying to shortlist potential solutions, a lot of people would now turn to something like AI to help them do a lot of the legwork and produce that list. Are there aspects to the digital customer journey that we need to change given that reality, where it won't necessarily be a person coming to the website to allow them to create an impression, but rather working off of other tools that kind of amalgamate a synopsis, if you will, of potential solutions that could be appropriate?
If we get to a point, which is an interesting thing to explore, when we get to the point where robots are making buying decisions and there isn't a human involved in the process, then absolutely there's no need to develop relationships in the way that we develop relationships as human beings. And I think the situation we have right now with all the different AI and what you described there, the synopsis and leaning on those AI tools to help us do our job, right, is they do the background research, but they will still present us with the facts that we need to make a decision. And so as long as there is a human making the decision, they're the ones that need to have a relationship with your brand. It's pretty unlikely that you will have someone who will stick their neck out and put their job on the line and buy a technology which is 100% recommended by AI, and I haven't even gone to your website and downloaded your whatever it is, your business case, or it's unlikely. I just don't think people buy in that way yet, which isn't to say that they won't tomorrow, but I don't think it's true for today. And I think that right now the burning issue for the CMOs listening to the podcast is I'm spending more and more. My neck is on the line. I'm stressed out of my mind. How do I show that I'm actually doing a really good job? And it's not my fault that Google is raising their AdWord costs by 43% month on month, right? I think that's the burning issue today.
Brilliant. Is there anything else that perhaps we should be aware of or I haven't asked in this area of marketing analytics and building out the customer journey?
Yeah, I think it's an exciting space, right? So we
Yeah,
started the
certainly is.
conversation by saying marketing has changed a lot in the last 20 years. And I think the big shifts, I think, if you want to look at a larger zoom out and look at the bigger perspective, the introduction of AI and the ability to generate lots and lots of content right now is going to dramatically shift the space, the whole marketing space, right? Because before chatbot or before that kind of generative AI, we were faced with social media being a very hungry beast and us having to produce lots and lots of content to feed it, right? And now all of a sudden the robots can produce that content, job done. So then you've got to think, as a consumer, I'm going to be flooded. Because before there was at least a throttle, the marketing department could only produce so much content. Now that throttle is gone, we're going to be fire hosed with content. So how does that change how we market to people and, more importantly, how we grab their attention? I think that necessarily changes. I think the other interesting thing is all the changes in privacy and privacy laws and cookies.
Right. Yeah.
That entire landscape. So before, where you had sophisticated brands building different and making decisions based on attribution, once that entire model implodes, where does that leave the current per-click digital advertising industry? At the moment, Google, and I don't throw these numbers around out of the air, I've literally had clients who have shown me reports where their click costs have gone up by 43% from 1 month to the next.
Wow.
Now, that's right. Wow, that's enormous. If you think in terms of your budget, I had 100,000 last month. Now I'm expected to cough up 143 just to maintain. I'm not changing anything. So I think that whole space, the dynamics of how we charge and how we pay will necessarily change. So I think it's an exciting dynamic space, and I think there will be really big changes at the end of the day. So things like transactional selling, you just, even if you don't know too much or haven't read a research paper on it, you can feel that as a person, I hate being bombarded with too much irrelevant stuff. And so why would that work if I apply it to my customers or my potential customers? We're going to have to get smarter. And I don't know what that looks like yet. The bet we're taking is that relationship is everything. And that selling based on a foundation of really solid relationships is going to see us through the turbulence in the market that's inevitable and coming over the next few years.
Certainly. And sound advice there. And to wrap things up, if you were listening to this episode, what would be your top takeaway?
Oh, I'd immediately run and do a RAMP report. No, kidding. I think my top takeaway would be, it is hard to be a marketer. I think it's very hard. I think there's a lot of pressure put on marketing departments and a lot of stress. And it's a moment in time where it's almost unfair. Like, how can you possibly know all the different things when the ground is shifting so quickly underneath you? And so I think the ability to have conversations around how do we make the prediction of what to do next? How do we make the allocation of budget for next month? Work with people who you can trust, who can help you in that space, because it is a tough job and you are right for feeling stressed. And what can you do to ease the burden in that area?
And Anna, if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
You can check out RAMMP at ramp.com. That's with a double M, or send me an email at anna@ramp.com. I'll be delighted to connect with anyone who's keen to explore.
Not a problem, and we'll include a link to the website in the show notes. Anna, this has been absolutely enlightening and delightful. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. I really appreciate the conversation, and thanks for the amazing exploratory discovery.